You're tuning into Ready, Set, Reset, where our goal is to help listeners reset their outlook by providing a closer look into behavioral and mental health in our youth. We visit with a range of professionals across the field to get their input and insight on what's really going on. Our first series kicks off with the Student Mental Health Chronicles, which features school counselors from across Texas, from public to private. This podcast is for educational and motivational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional training or personal therapy. Hello, and welcome to the Ready, Set, Reset podcast. I'm your host, Sierra O'Neill, licensed professional counselor and founder of Reset IOP. With me is my co-host, Mrs. Penny Haight, licensed professional counselor supervisor and owner of Counseling by Penny and Associates.
Hi, I'm Penny. I'm a former school counselor of 9 years. You are tuning in to an episode of our inspiring podcast that spotlights school counselors and the incredible work they do day in and day out with students. The content you will hear on this podcast today is focused on the struggles in schools related to mental health of youth. We'll be providing weekly insights, resources, and solutions to address the growing and ongoing issues that will support other school counselors, parents, teachers, and the students.
All right, so our guest today is school counselor Mr. Abdias Gomez, here with us from Edcouch Elsa ISD. Welcome, Mr. Gomez. How are you feeling today?
Well, thank you, and I'm feeling great. Thank you for having me here today.
Yes, no, it's a pleasure to have you, and I'm excited to, learn a little bit more about you and your experience in the field, as well as Edcouch Elsa ISD, as this is my first learning of that ISD today.
Actually, it's two cities. It's located near McAllen. If you're familiar with McAllen, it's
Okay.
located about 20-minute drive from McAllen. It's next to Weslaco as well. If you're from there.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm a counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor as well as a school counselor.
Mhm.
I also do a little bit of private practice on this side, and I'm also a counselor for BetterHelp.com as well.
Okay.
This is my 26th year in education,
Wow.
19 as a counselor, and I truly believe it's a calling, and I believe that all of us are natural born counselors.
Mhm.
We all have those tools, and it's just a matter of honing them to try and find ways to help people. So I really love what I do.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay. And so as your experience as a school counselor, now you said about 20 years now?
It's going on 20 years, 26 as an educator,
Right.
my 19th year as a school counselor.
Okay. And what grades or age group do you work with?
Oh, all of them.
Okay.
I've been a counselor from pre-K all the way to high
Oh,
school, and then after high school. Currently, right now, the school where I'm at has grade levels from kindergarten to fifth grade. But I've also been a high school counselor. I have counseled also at schools for students recovering credits.
okay.
As I said, currently I'm also a counselor for BetterHelp.com. So I do see adolescents under another site called TeenCounseling.com. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to work with all populations,
Okay.
a diverse population, and also geriatric populations as well
hmm
in the private practice that I used to work with.
Okay. All right. Well, that's amazing. And we're definitely, again, glad to have you today, especially another fellow LPC as well. It's not as common to, find school counselors that are still LPCs as well, as they kind of, stop where they are, but they still do great work. And I'm glad to, hear that.
Great.
All right. So if we go ahead and jump into some questions, let's start with kind of the challenges that you see. So what are some common mental health challenges that you've observed in students and how do you address them?
Well, one of the most common mental health challenges that I see, and this is something that happens on a daily basis, is anxiety. A lot of the kids today are facing anxiety for different reasons, and a lot of times that anxiety comes from trauma that they experience in some area of their life. I've also completed the EMDR basic training as well, so sometimes I do use some of those same um, techniques from EMDR with my students also to help alleviate some of the trauma that some of the students face. And sometimes that trauma can come from having experienced a violent act right outside their home. Sometimes that trauma can come from something that they saw. It could be firsthand, or it can be secondary trauma. They might have heard about it or something they've even seen on television that they worry about. But then that creates anxiety. And when they come to school, they have that to contend with. Many times, the students that I see also are experiencing grief. And that's something that has happened many times recently, especially with the onset of COVID.
Yeah.
We've had many, many children that have lost grandparents, parents, brothers, uncles, sisters, and having to cope with that and helping students process that grief um, and the anxiety associated with possibly them contracting COVID has been something that myself and I know other counselors have been dealing with for quite some time now.
Yes, it's great that you are EMDR trained, and there's so many techniques that from EMDR practice that could be taught to school counselors. Can you just give like one tip, one go-to thing that would
Oh,
be
well,
helpful?
one of my favorite techniques is the butterfly hug. The butterfly hug is one of my favorite techniques. I like to incorporate that with happy place, and I'd like to have the students imagine a happy place that they feel safe and comfortable, and then practice the butterfly hug with the breathing, and teaching them those three strategies together many times helps them to de-escalate when they're having a great deal of anxiety. I use also that with my BetterHelp clients as well, with adults with very good results. But yeah, I received my basic skills training with Dr. Robbie Adler Tapia. And she came down to where we live, and it was through an Hidalgo County, which is a county where I live. They trained 50 counselors throughout the county, and I was one of them, fortunate enough to be one of them. So I like to utilize those techniques and strategies with my students. And students, you can actually see the results fairly quick, and they start to reach a point where well, using EMDR, you use as I'm sure you know, you use a scale. So you use kind of like a sud scale. So to get them down to zero, it happens I find quicker with children than with adults, but as you know, every case is different.
Yeah. So, because not everybody knows exactly the butterfly hug, can you explain exactly like where you cross your arms
Yeah,
and where the hands are placed
I'll
on?
do my best.
Yeah.
So if you were to imagine yourself crossing your arms over your chest with your right hand touching your left shoulder and your left hand touching your right shoulder. And as you close your eyes and you breathe steady, you start to tap one side at a time, lifting your right four fingers, tapping down, your left four fingers, tapping down, your right four fingers, tapping down, your left four fingers, tapping down, and so forth. And you just self-soothe like that. It's very self-soothing. It mimics a lot of times. I feel like when you are carrying a baby and you're soothing the baby and the tapping that you're doing. I believe that it's very keen with that, and also with EMDR, you're utilizing what's called bilateral stimulation. So with bilateral stimulation, you're doing the left tap, right tap, left tap, right tap, and that's very self-soothing for individuals. And so that's one of the techniques that I use.
All right. So next up, I'm just kind of wondering with working with all grade levels across the board. So this may be a vast answer for you across the board. What are some of the key indicators of warning signs that school counselors should be aware of when it comes to students with mental health? And just given your experience, if by chance you could give us some ideas on the younger end, those may be kindergartners that we overlook probably too easily and normalize for, oh, that's age appropriate, and maybe to the older end.
Of course, yeah. Let me give you one example. And this is just purely not going to list any names, and it's just an example.
Yeah.
Let's say that there is a kindergartner,
Hmm.
and that kindergartner, let's say their father goes to work in the oil fields,
Hmm.
and so will leave for weeks at a time. Well, on the days that that kindergartner's father leaves to go work, I know because on those days she has a great deal of separation anxiety,
Okay.
does not want to come in through the front door of the school.
Hmm.
And that's just one example. Another example might be a total change in behavior.
Hmm.
If the student is very happy and the student is very very calm, and then they switch to anger a lot of times, or maybe sadness, then you know something is different with that
Hmm.
child, either something that happened in the classroom or something at home. So as a teacher, one of the things that when I do get a chance to speak to my teachers, I let them know, well, you want to pull that student aside or in private or during your
Hmm.
conference and ask them how they're doing. I'd like for my teachers to also use scaling questions, like they use in brief solution focused therapy, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like Disney World fantastic, and one being not so good.
Hmm.
Where are you at today? And then to get an indicator of, where that student is. And then that'll open the door to maybe the student talking about what's going on, and just one example of how maybe that I give a teacher to kind of get the ball rolling
Hmm.
to find out. And then they refer them to me, or I'm blessed, I have so many incredible teachers in my school.
Yeah.
They are teachers and counselors and many times parents to these kids.
Great. Okay. I think the scaling method is a great way to help those kids that can't verbalize how they're actually feeling. I do that quite often with my groups when our after school IOP program. So every afternoon when we get started, we rate our anxiety and our depression on that scale from 1 to 10. So we can understand, kind of where you fall on the scale, but they can't really communicate it.
Yeah.
So if you've been at a 3 for the last 2 weeks and all of a sudden you're at an 8, it's like, okay, we've got something to work with here and work through. Let's understand what those triggers are and how we can get you back down to that 3, which may be their baseline. It's not going to always be 0. Some people just have that anxiety that just kind of sits with them, but it's their baseline. It's where they are. So,
Recognizing those triggers is very important. Like
yeah.
you said, to learn for students to recognize that a trigger is happening
Hmm.
and then to try and utilize some of the coping skills, whether it be the 4-4-6 breathing method, whether it be pretzel breathing, whether it be any different type of square breathing, infinity breathing, any different type of breathing strategies you might use, or something else that they can do tactile with their hands, and
Yes.
just to try and get ahead of it.
Yeah.
If they can recognize those triggers,
Mhm.
that would be the goal.
Yeah.
We have a counselor that's in our practice that uses the phone, and she has them trace the phone and
Oh, square breathing.
uh-huh,
Gotcha.
it makes it tactile because they usually always have a phone.
It's a good idea. It's a good
Yeah.
idea.
And you mentioned pretzel breathing. I haven't heard of that before. Could you in like a
Yeah.
little bit more?
That's gonna be really hard to describe. I'm
Okay.
afraid. But I learned that one at a training I did through Region One Education Center
Okay.
over in Edinburgh, close to where I live. So I kind of like to think of it as the Macarena, because you're putting the hand in like this, and then you put the other hand in like this, and then you cross your fingers,
Okay.
and then you breathe in and you squeeze tight,
Okay.
not to the point of hurting yourself,
Okay.
but to the point of you feel that tenseness in your shoulders, and then you hold it in for about 3 seconds,
Hmm.
and then you release for about 4 to 6 seconds, and then you let your arm slowly fall down to your side. And when you're bringing in your arms, it kind of resembles a pretzel.
Yeah, I see that.
So,
Okay.
and then you just let it go down. And when you finish, you start to feel a little bit of tenseness go away in your shoulders, because to do that, you have to tense your muscles. And so tensing them and releasing is the relaxing part of it.
That's like the breathing combined with progressive muscle relaxation techniques,
Yes,
and it's
that's right.
all for kids. That's a
Yeah. Breathing
great
combined. Well, I can't take credit, 'cause
strategy.
I learned it in a training I went to.
Yeah.
But there's so many great trainings out there. Like I learned another one, several of them here. So this is really great that counselors can get together and learn from each other.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Hey, growth is ongoing, and in our field there's always something new coming up. Again, while we're setting this platform for school counselors and just kind of sharing these things across the board. So all right. So then if we kind of move on next, as far as new school counselors coming into the field, what's your advice that you would give to, newer expiring school counselors who are entering the field with a focus on mental health?
Uh, the number one advice I can give new aspiring school counselors is that you are needed. And it's going to take time. And don't think that you have to learn all the skills at once.
Hmm.
It's a learning process as you go. And sometimes your best teachers are the students. And you will learn so much from the students. And it's not all like you see on books.
Hmm.
Many times, the things that you will encounter, the difficulties that you will have, will be within your heart. And they will be things that you may need to approach a supervisor for
Mhm.
clarification, and not to be afraid to check in with your fellow counselors, because that's what we are. We're a network and everybody should be there to help one another. And I've never met a counselor that isn't readily available to help out with either advice or suggestions or any type of information when it comes to giving the best possible help to a student. I've never met a counselor who says no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a great thing to hit on. It's like never, hesitate to reach out or consult, because even whether we've been in the field 10 years, 2 years, or 20 years, ongoing consulting and kind of leaning on one another is what helps us continue to, help the people because we run into different things all the time.
absolutely.
And, it's something that everything eventually kind of cross paths. So I think that that's great advice to put out there for new counselors. Penny, I'm wondering with you, just kind of as well as being a supervisor, you supervise a lot of the, the new and oncoming coming therapists, whether it be school or clinicians. What's some advice you may have for new therapists or new counselors?
Oh, I think it's exactly what you said. I think with supervision, so many times people are like, well, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. And I think if you can think of supervision as also like support, if whether you're going to a mentor or peer or I have actually hired a supervisor on certain different cases
Mm.
where I needed somebody that had that expertise. And I wasn't somebody that I normally saw or in my practice. It was somebody outside with different eyes.
Mm.
And I think that being aware that that is good practice, that's the best practice, that's standard practice.
Yes.
And that we can just learn, I think not Desiree, Sierra said in another podcast that, we can learn from each other because how each of us may go at the counseling session from a different angle. And it may be something that you didn't think of. I
Asking for
know
help is the standard. It's
exactly.
part of the job.
Yeah, and I think I learn from my students all the time, from my supervisees. I'm like, "Oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way. That's pretty smart."
Okay, well, I think that's great advice from both of you guys. And so, any new and aspiring school counselors and even LPCs out there, definitely take some of these things and, just kind of make more out of them and don't hesitate to consult and reach out and just know that it's a ever growing field. All right. So, Mr. Gomez, I feel like it's been a great conversation today. It was a pleasure to sit down with you. I personally feel like I've picked up a few new things. I'm definitely going to try some pretzel breathing with some of my kids because that's pretty neat. I like it, and I know some kids that I have in mind that will respond well to that, and even getting them to do it at home, and heck, even their parents. So I just appreciate you again for being a guest today and providing some additional insight in what you deal with day in and day out as a school counselor in Edcouch Elsa ISD. Before we close out, if you had anything to leave with our listeners today, what would that be?
Oh, geez. Just to keep trying your best with kids. I mean, nobody's perfect,
Hmm.
but the underlying thing, the common denominator is that you care. And anyone who's genuine, a child or whether it be a child or an adult, they're going to see that,
Yeah.
So bring that genuineness into the profession, bring that kindness, bring that love into the profession, and you will succeed.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that's great. All right. Well, that is all for us today. Thanks for tuning in and taking the time out of your day to listen in on mental health. And remember, sometimes all it takes is resetting your outlook. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ready, Set, Reset 1. Follow us on Instagram at ready_set_reset1 for mental health tips, laughs, and motivation. And if you know a student or have a child in the Fort Worth area that could use some additional support, visit our website at sunflowersigma.com to see if Reset IOP is right for them. You will find the resources discussed in today's podcast in the description area.